Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we are going over domain controllers. If you just want to go over the configuration and the lab itself, please go ahead and skip through the video to the chapter. I will be leaving it in the description and you'll also be able to see that on the video. Now we will be going through what a domain controller is and also how it completely functions in the first half of this video. The second half of the video, we will be going over the exact configuration. Now to get started on what a domain controller actually is, the easiest way to explain this is it's just a computer. Let's name it domain controller here with an operating system on it. In our case, we will be labbing with a Windows Server 2019 operating system. And from here, we will be promoting this server into a domain controller. And of course, I will be going over how that actually works later on in the video. And what this really allows us to do is instead of your computer being on an independent network called a work group, it will join to this domain. And in this domain, you'll have user objects, you'll have computer objects. And every time you join a device, say a PC, we'll just name them all PCs here. PC1, PC2, and PC3. And what really happens is you join these devices to your domain controller and it'll start populating different computers here as objects. And what that allows you to do is authenticate to the domain controller if you have any policies in place. The same thing would happen for users. You would create a user here. Let's say we make 3 users and each user can sign into the computers with their usernames. And of course, you use the domain controller to organize things, create things, reset passwords, delete or add computers, delete or add users, and so on and so forth. And this gives you so much functionality over a network because you are then able to authenticate users to different file resources. For example, if you have some files on a server, you are then able to use these usernames and these passwords here to authenticate to the file server. And you're able to set all of these different permissions. It just really allows a cohesive environment where everybody can speak to everybody. You'll have user authentication, you'll have computer policies being applied, and that is all the function of a domain controller. Now that was a pretty simple explanation for something that is kind of complicated, but we can get more into the weeds by configuring it, as it may be a lot easier to understand and comprehend as we configure each role and service on this domain controller, and of course the domain controller itself. So all we're going to do is go ahead into our home lab, and I made a video. If you have not seen it already, this is how you set up a test lab or a test computer box in your home environment, and that way we can get over to a Windows server. So the first thing we're going to do is, after we get Proxmox open, or of course if you're in a real work environment, this totally applies to you, we are going to need to get the ISO image for Windows Server 2019, because that is what we are planning on using for our domain controller. And to get there, you would just go ahead over to this website. You can of course just Google search Windows Server 2019 ISO like this. Hit enter. It's actually your first thing. If you don't have a license, don't worry about it. There is an evaluation and it's pretty much the best case for being able to get a Windows server for free for 90 days. So after you upload this to your Proxmox server, all we're gonna have to do is create a VM. Now I will go through how we create a VM, just follow along here. So we are going to create the name. We'll just name it DCO1. Don't worry about any of this other information, just hit next. We're gonna select our image. Again, I already did this. Hopefully you did too. We go ahead and change this to Microsoft Windows, and everything else should be correct. You can take the defaults for everything. Go next. Now for sockets and cores, typically you can leave it here, especially if you only have a one processor computer that you're working off of, you can always increase the CPU load, but it shouldn't be necessary for the most part. That's a little bit more advanced, and I can definitely get into the weeds on this one. For now, let's leave everything at default. And for RAM, of course, this will directly affect our speed of the computer. So we will shoot this up to 8 gigs. And then after we get to 8, we're gonna go hit next, finish. Now, after that, we are going to go over to DC01, which we just created, and hit start. Make sure you're hovering over the console to watch this thing boot up. All right, from here, we're just going to go through the Windows Server 2019 setup. And make sure when you are doing this, we are going over to the desktop experience. If you do not use desktop experience, you are just going to have a command line. And obviously we do not want that, not for this anyway. Go ahead and press next, accept, next. Then we're going to hit custom, hit next onto the drive, and it will start installing Windows Server. I'll come right back to the video once this gets completed. All right, now that we're back, we're going to just go ahead and create our administrator password. And here we're just going to go into console and open no VNC. This is just a pop-out window using something called no VNC, and this is a little bit easier to navigate inside of Proxmox rather than trying to use a console. We can go ahead and send the Control-Alt-Delete command and then sign in. Of course, you won't have this issue if you're doing this on a separate box and not through a hypervisor. So quite a bit easier. You do have to obviously hook up a monitor, keyboard, and mouse to it though. Now that we're here, we are going to add roles and features, and this is the beginning of our domain controller setup. So hit next, next, keep on going. Here it is, domain services, add features, and continue on through next, install. And I'll get back to you guys once this finishes installing. Now that we finish installing, go ahead and close this out and hit this little flag icon up here, and it's going to say promote the server to a domain controller, and we're going to want to hit that. So if this is your first domain controller in your environment, we're going to want to go down to the last option. First option is an existing domain, and the second option is a new domain in an existing forest. We're going to have to create a new forest first and enter in your domain name. We're going to go with Ryko Tech. This can be nearly anything. However, it is a good practice to use if you own a domain like a website, I would definitely suggest using the website's name here. Down the line, it just makes things a little bit more seamless. Now let's create our password. And you leave these as default settings. RODC, the read-only domain controller, is very useful when you're spinning up more domain controllers, but they're all reading from a different domain controller. So it basically propagates down. And this way, on that specific domain controller, maybe like a secondary or a third office or something like that, they can't configure all of its settings on there. So it's a lot more secure when it's off-site for a read-only domain controller, and generally speaking, it's just best practice to do so. So we hit next here, next again, just keep on going through it. Pretty much most of the time you're going to keep a lot of default settings for this stuff. We're just going to keep hitting next until all of this gets loaded on through. And we're finally at the installation phase. Now that we've finished installing and ended up having a restart, one of the first things we're going to do when we come back up is change our adapter settings. If you go over to Ethernet and you go into the network and sharing, and we can change adapter settings here. So you'll right click your adapter. This is your Ethernet adapter. go to the properties. You'll see the IPv4. And we're going to make sure this is configured correctly. This is going to be the most important thing for networking on your domain controller. Right now, we definitely want to set a static IP address. Easiest way to do that is to find its current IP address, because of course this is going to be available. And we can just enter in this information here. And that way we make sure the static is going to be working properly. It's going to have this IP address, this subnet, and this as the default gateway. And now after we enter in this information, we are going to notice that it has a DNS server, and it's whatever this means, right? Now what this is actually a loopback address, and a loopback address just points to itself. So it's almost the exact same thing as having something like this, right? So this IP address here is actually just this IP address up here. And when you have one domain controller, typically you will end up having two, best case scenario for an office when you start spinning things up. You're going to want your DNS server to end up pointing to another DNS server. And that is the best practice when you're starting to hook all this stuff up. But in this case, when we only have one domain controller and we're just starting out, just the loopback address is totally fine. But here we can just hit OK again. And down here, we just make sure that you're getting internet. If you put in anything incorrectly, you will notice that you will not have internet. So just double check that afterwards. And from here, everything on the domain controller, at least from the beginning standpoint, is totally finished. Now we can start getting into the thick of things, and that is through Active Directory and DNS. We will likely be doing DHCP, and all of those will be pretty long videos in and of itself. So I will be creating those next up. So from here, I do appreciate you guys watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and stick around for some more. Thank you very much. Peace.